Danny Cole had never thought much about the stars. For most of his life, they were just lights in the sky. Then humanity learned they were not alone, and everything changed. It was the year 2187. 3 years ago, human ships had met alien ships near the edge of the solar system. The aliens called themselves the. They were tall, silver-skinned, and had 4 arms. Their empire stretched across 300 star systems. Humanity had just learned to travel between planets. They had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. The first meeting had not gone well. A misunderstanding led to weapons fire. A small war erupted along the border. It lasted only 4 months, but millions died on both sides. Everyone expected humanity to lose. They had better ships, better weapons, and more soldiers than anyone could count. But humans were strange. They fought in ways they did not expect. They hid in asteroid fields and attacked supply lines. They crashed damaged ships into enemy carriers. They refused to surrender even when logic said they should. In the end, they asked for peace. Not because they were losing, but because they were tired of the cost. Danny had fought in that war. He was a Marine stationed on a small outpost near Cygnus Station. When they attacked, his unit held the line for 6 days with no reinforcements. Out of 200 soldiers, only 19 survived. Danny was one of them. After the war, he left the military. He became a cargo hauler, moving supplies between Earth and the Moon colonies. It was quiet work. He liked quiet. He had seen enough noise and fire to last a lifetime. Then one morning, 2 men in gray suits knocked on his apartment door. "Danny Cole," one of them asked. "That's me. Please come with us. Earth's government needs to speak with you." Danny thought about refusing, but the men had that look in their eyes, the kind that said refusing was not really an option. So he grabbed his jacket and followed them to a black transport vehicle waiting outside. They took him to Geneva, to a building with no windows and guards at every door. Inside, he was led to a conference room where 6 people sat around a long table. At the head of the table was a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. Her name was Ambassador Mitchell, and she was one of the most powerful diplomats on Earth. "Please sit down, Mr. Cole," she said. Danny sat. He did not speak. He had learned long ago that when powerful people wanted to talk, it was better to listen. "I will be direct with you," the ambassador said. "They have offered a new treaty, a permanent peace. No more border patrols, no more tensions, full trade and cooperation between our species." "That sounds good," Danny said carefully. "What's the catch?" The ambassador smiled, but there was no warmth in it. They have a tradition. When 2 great powers make peace, the bond must be sealed through marriage, a union of bloodlines. They have asked for a human to marry into one of their notable families. Danny felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "And you want me to be that human?" "Yes." "Why me?" The ambassador glanced at the others around the table. Then she looked back at Danny. "We ran your profile through every test we have. Your psychological stability is remarkable. You survived Cygnus Station without breaking. You adapt quickly. You stay calm under pressure. And frankly, Mr. Cole, you have no family and no close connections. If something goes wrong, there will be no one to make trouble back home." Danny laughed bitterly. "So I'm perfect because no one will miss me." "I would not put it that way. But it's true." The ambassador did not answer. That was answer enough. Danny stared at the table for a long time. He thought about his small apartment, his cargo ship, his empty life. He thought about the friends he had lost in the war. He thought about the millions more who would die if the peace failed. "If I say no," he asked, "what happens?" "The treaty falls apart. They will see it as an insult. War becomes likely again." "And if I say yes?" "You will travel to there. You will marry someone from their nobility. You will live among them as a symbol of peace between our peoples." Danny closed his eyes. He had never wanted to be a symbol. He had never wanted to be anything but a man trying to get through each day. but sometimes life did not care what you wanted. "Fine," he said, "I'll do it." The ambassador nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. You are saving more lives than you know." 2 weeks later, Danny stood in a military hangar, staring at a transport ship. It was beautiful in a strange way, all smooth curves and glowing lights. It looked like something grown rather than built. A young woman in a military uniform walked up beside him. She had dark hair and serious eyes. Her name tag said, "Lieutenant Amy," she said, offering her hand. "I'm your liaison. I'll be traveling with you to Aura Prime." Danny shook her hand. "You got stuck with babysitting duty." "I volunteered." She smiled slightly. "Someone has to make sure you don't start another war by accident." "I'll try my best." They boarded the ship together. The interior was strange, with walls that seemed to shift color in the light and seats that molded themselves to human bodies. A crew member, tall and silent, guided them to their quarters. The journey would take 3 weeks through something called. Danny did not understand the science. He just knew that when he stepped off this ship, he would be farther from Earth than any human had ever been. On the final day of travel, Danny stood at a viewing window and watched as a planet grew larger in the distance. Aura Prime. It was covered in violet clouds and vast oceans that glowed faintly green. "It's beautiful," Amy said, standing beside him. "It's terrifying," Danny replied. She nodded. "Those two things are not always different." The ship descended through the clouds. Below them, a city appeared. Towers of crystal and light stretched toward the sky. Flying vehicles moved between them like schools of fish. It was a civilization older than human history, and Danny was about to walk into its heart. He took a deep breath. He had survived war. He had survived loneliness. He would survive this too. He had too. The Grand Palace of Echoes was the largest building Danny had ever seen. It rose from the center of the capital city like a mountain made of glass and light. As their transport approached, Danny realized that the palace was so tall that clouds actually formed inside its upper levels. He could see them drifting past the windows, trapped within walls that touched the sky. "The palace has stood for 8,000 years, Amy said, reading from a data tablet. "It was built by the first empress. Every ruler since has added to it." 8,000 years, Danny repeated quietly. Humanity had barely learned to write 8,000 years ago. These people had been building empires. The transport landed on a platform near the palace entrance. A group waited for them. They wore flowing robes of deep purple and gold. Their silver skin caught the light and seemed to glow softly from within. Each of them had 4 arms, and they held their hands in careful positions that Danny guessed had some kind of meaning he did not understand. One of them stepped forward. He was taller than the others, with thin lines of gold paint across his face. "I am High Steward," he said. His voice was smooth and cold. "You are the human called Danny Cole." "That's me." "Follow me, the court awaits." They walked through hallways that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered with images that moved like living paintings. Battles, celebrations, coronations, all playing out in silent color. Servants stopped and stared as Danny passed. Some looked curious. Others looked disgusted. Danny kept his eyes forward and his back straight. He had learned long ago not to show weakness in front of strangers. Finally, they reached a massive door made of something that looked like frozen moonlight. 2 guards pushed it open, and Danny stepped into the throne room. It took his breath away. The room was as large as a sports stadium. The ceiling disappeared into distant darkness. Floating platforms held nobles who looked down at the floor below. Thousands of them watched in perfect silence as Danny walked the long path toward the center. At the end of the room stood a throne carved from a single white crystal, and on that throne sat a figure that made everyone else in the room seem small. She was tall even for her silver skin was flawless. Her 4 arms rested on the throne with perfect grace. Her eyes were the color of deep violet, and when they looked at Danny, he felt like she was seeing straight through him. She rose. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "I am," she said. Her voice filled the chamber without effort. "Supreme monarch of the collective, ruler of 300 star systems, guardian of the eternal flame." Danny's mind went blank. This was not a noble from some minor family. This was the Empress herself. He was supposed to marry the most powerful being in the known galaxy. "You seem surprised," said. There was no warmth in her voice, but no cruelty either, just observation. "I was told I would marry someone from a notable family," Danny managed to say. "They did not mention that family was the royal bloodline." A ripple of whispers moved through the watching nobles. Some sounded shocked, others sounded amused. Descended from her throne. Each step was precise and graceful. She stopped a few feet from Danny and studied him like a scientist studying a specimen. "Among my people," she said, "the strongest bonds are formed through marriage. If this peace is to last, it must be sealed with the highest bond possible. I am the highest." "So you offered yourself?" "Yes." Danny met her eyes. He did not look away. "That must have made some of your nobles angry." For the first time, something like interest flickered across her face. "Most humans we have met would not dare to say such things before my court." "I'm not most humans." "So I am beginning to see." The ceremony that followed was brief but heavy with ritual. Danny spoke words he did not fully understand, placed her hand over his heart and said something in her own language. The nobles watched in silence, their faces unreadable. When it was done, Danny was led to a private chamber in a distant wing of the palace. The room was larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. The bed could have held 10 people. The windows looked out over a city that stretched to the horizon. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at nothing. Hours later, there was a soft knock at the door. It opened before he could answer and walked in alone. She had changed from her ceremonial robes into something simpler. She almost looked ordinary, if an alien empress could ever look ordinary. "You have questions," she said. It was not a question. "Many." She sat across from him, keeping a respectful distance. "Ask." "Why me? Why a human at all? Your people could have demanded anything. Territory, resources, technology. Why a marriage?" Was quiet for a moment, because I wanted to understand. "Understand what?" "Your kind, humans." She tilted her head slightly. "When we first encountered you, we thought you were primitives. Your ships were slow, your weapons were weak. We expected you to fall in days. Instead, you fought like nothing we had ever seen. You were illogical. You sacrificed yourselves for no strategic gain. You refused to surrender when surrender was the only reasonable choice." She leaned forward slightly. "We have ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. No species has ever surprised us. You surprised us. I needed to know why." Danny laughed softly. "And you thought marrying one of us would give you the answer." "I thought it was a beginning." They talked through the night. Danny told her about Earth, about the war, about the friends he had lost and the quiet life he had tried to build afterward. Told him about her people, about the burden of ruling an empire that expected perfection, about the loneliness of a throne. When the first light of Ara's sun crept through the windows, Danny realized something unexpected. He had come here expecting a prison. Instead, he had found something else. He was not sure what to call it yet, but it felt like a door opening, just a crack, onto something new. Stood to leave. At the door she paused. "You are not what I expected, Danny Cole." "Neither are you." She almost smiled. It was the smallest movement, barely visible, but Danny saw it. Then she was gone, and he was alone with the rising sun. Life in the court was like walking through a minefield where the mines were invisible and always moving. Every word carried hidden meaning. Every gesture could be an insult or a compliment depending on context. Danny did not understand. He learned quickly that smiling at the wrong time could offend a noble house, and standing in the wrong position could suggest weakness. Amy helped him navigate the dangers. She studied culture with the focus of a soldier preparing for battle. She taught him which phrases to avoid, which nobles to respect, and which ones were secretly plotting against the treaty. "The court is divided," she explained one morning as they walked through the palace gardens. "About half of them accept the peace. They see the logic. Humans are stubborn, and war with us is expensive. But the other half thinks the Empress has lost her mind. They believe marrying a human is an insult to their entire species." "And what do they think about me personally?" Amy hesitated. "Most of them see you as an animal, a clever animal maybe, but still something lesser." Danny nodded slowly. He had felt their stares. He had heard their whispers. They looked at him the way a person might look at a dog that had wandered into a formal dinner. "I've been underestimated before," he said. "It usually works in my favor." The weeks passed. Danny attended court functions and stood silently beside's throne. He learned to recognize the major noble houses and their complicated relationships. He learned that Lord Dorn, a military commander with a scar across two of his arms, hated him most of all. Dorn was a war hero. He had commanded fleets for 2 centuries. He had been one of the loudest voices calling for humanity's complete destruction during the war. The peace treaty was a personal insult to him. The marriage was even worse. He made his hatred clear at every opportunity. When Danny entered a room, would turn his back. When Danny spoke, would talk over him. When Danny sat, would make comments about primitives not understanding proper seating positions. Danny endured it all in silence. He had faced worse than insults. But Dorn was not satisfied with insults. He wanted humiliation. One evening, during a feast honoring some ancient victory, stood before the assembled nobles and addressed Danny directly for the first time. "Human," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "I have heard that your kind considers yourselves warriors. Is this true?" Every eye turned to Danny. Sat on her throne, her expression unreadable. "We have our share of soldiers," Danny replied carefully. "Then perhaps you would honor us with a demonstration. I challenge you to a duel of honor. Resonance blades, first blood or yield." A murmur ran through the crowd. Amy, standing near the wall, went pale. Danny knew what this was. Resonance blades were weapons that responded to willpower and emotional control. They trained with them for decades. Dorn had centuries of experience. This was not a fair challenge. It was an execution designed to look like sport. But refusing would be worse. Among the refusing a challenge meant admitting you were inferior. It would prove everything said about humans. Danny looked at. She gave no sign of what she wanted him to do. This was his choice alone. "I accept," he said. The duel took place in a great arena beneath the palace. Thousands of watched from tiered seats. Danny stood on one end, holding a resonance blade for the first time. The weapon hummed in his hands, alive with strange energy. Dorn stood across from him, perfectly calm. He had done this 1,000 times. He moved the blade through the air with the ease of a master. The signal was given, attacked. The blade came at Danny faster than thought. He barely dodged the first strike. The second caught his arm, drawing a line of blood. The third knocked him to the ground. The crowd cheered, stood over him, blade raised. "Yield," he said. "Yield like the animal you are." Danny stood up. His eyes widened slightly. He struck again. Danny blocked barely and was knocked back. He fell again. His body screamed with pain. He stood up again. The cheering faded. The arena grew quiet. Struck harder, faster. He opened cuts on Danny's chest, his legs, his face. Each blow should have ended the fight. Each time Danny rose. "Yield," shouted, and now there was something in his voice that had not been there before. Confusion, maybe even fear. Danny spat blood on the arena floor. "No." He attacked. His technique was clumsy, untrained, blocked easily, but Danny kept coming. He fought like a man who had nothing to lose. He fought like the Marines at Cygnus Station, dying on their feet rather than living on their knees. Stumbled, for just a moment, shock broke his concentration. Danny's blade nicked his arm. First blood. The arena exploded into chaos. Danny collapsed to his knees, stared at his arm, at the thin line of silver blood with an expression of disbelief. Then something extraordinary happened. Dorn lowered his blade. He looked at Danny, really looked at him, and something changed in his ancient eyes. "I called for the duel to end when you fell the first time," he said slowly. "By our customs you had lost, but you refused to stay down." "I don't stay down," Danny said through bloody teeth. "No, you do not," was silent for a long moment. "In my 300 years I have never seen such refusal to yield. Among my people this means more than victory. This is the heart of a true warrior." He extended one of his 4 hands to Danny. "I was wrong about humans. I was wrong about you." Danny took his hand and let the old warrior pull him to his feet. In her throne above the arena, watched, and for the first time, those watching closely saw something new in the Empress's eyes. It looked like hope. After the duel, everything changed. The nobles who had once ignored Danny now watched him with careful respect. Dorn, once his greatest enemy, became something like an ally. He began teaching Danny the history of the people, explaining their traditions and beliefs with the patience of a scholar. "You have earned the right to understand us," said one evening. "Few outsiders ever have." And Danny began spending more time together. At first, their conversations were formal, the careful exchanges of 2 people bound by duty. But slowly, something deeper began to grow. They walked through the palace gardens at night, talking about their worlds, their fears, their hopes. Danny learned that had ruled for 300 years. She had never chosen her own path. Every moment of her life had been decided by tradition and expectation. The marriage to Danny was the first choice she had ever made for herself. "My council opposed it," she admitted. "They said it was weakness. They said humans were beneath us. But I saw something in your kind that I had never seen in my own people." "What was that?" "Freedom. Your species is so young, so brief. Yet you live with such passion. You love and hate and fight with everything you have because you know your time is short." She looked at him with those violet eyes. "My people have forgotten how to feel that way. We have become cold and careful because we have forever to lose." "Maybe that's why we surprised you in the war," Danny said. "We didn't have time to think about losing." "Perhaps," she smiled, and it was warmer than any smile she had shown before. "Or perhaps you are simply too stubborn to know when you are beaten." Danny laughed. It felt good to laugh. He had not done it in a long time. But not everyone in the Empire was pleased with the peace. There were whispers in the shadows, movements in the dark. A group called the Crimson Veil had existed for centuries, believing that they were destined to rule all other species as servants. They saw the treaty with humanity as betrayal. They saw the marriage as corruption. And they had decided to end both. The attack came during the Feast of Eternal Stars, the most sacred celebration in the calendar. Every noble house gathered in the grand hall, sat on her throne with Danny beside her. For one night, the entire empire celebrated together. No one expected violence. The first sign was a guard falling, then another. Then the lights flickered and went dark. When they came back on, figures in crimson masks filled the hall. They carried weapons Danny had never seen before, devices that crackled with killing energy. "The reign of weakness ends tonight," a voice shouted. "The throne falls and the will rise pure again." They fired. Nobles screamed and ran. Guards rushed to fight but were cut down. In the chaos, one of the assassins reached the throne and pointed a weapon directly at. Danny moved without thinking. He threw himself in front of her, knocking the weapon aside. The blast struck the wall behind them, leaving a smoking crater. But another assassin was faster. A small device flew through the air and struck's neck. She gasped and collapsed. Her body went rigid, paralyzed by some kind of toxin designed for physiology. Danny caught her before she hit the ground. "Amy," he shouted. Lieutenant appeared through the smoke, a weapon in her hands. "I'm here, the exits are blocked. They planned this perfectly." Danny lifted in his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her violet eyes looked up at him, conscious but unable to move. "Can you fix her?" he asked. "Not here, we need the medical wing, but it's on the other side of the palace." Danny looked at the chaos around them. Assassins were everywhere. Bodies lay on the floor. The path to safety was through a war zone. "Then we go through them." What followed was something that would speak of for generations. Danny Cole, a single human carrying their paralyzed empress, fought through the Palace of Echoes with nothing but a stolen weapon and impossible determination. Amy covered him as best she could. Dorn, wounded but alive, gathered surviving guards and created distractions, but most of the fighting fell to Danny. He used every trick he had learned as a Marine. He set ambushes in corridors. He used the palace's strange architecture to trap enemies in dead ends. He made the assassins afraid of every shadow. They had expected to kill a primitive. They found something else entirely. "What is he?" One of the Crimson Veil screamed before Danny knocked him unconscious. They reached the medical wing's door, but more assassins were coming. Danny sat down gently and stood in front of the entrance, weapon raised. "Get inside," he told Amy. "Find the doctors, save her." "Danny, you can't hold them alone." "Watch me." For 40 minutes, Danny Cole held that door. Enemies came in waves. He fought with weapons, with fists, with pieces of broken furniture. When he ran out of energy blasts, he used the weapon as a club. When the club broke, he used his bare hands. Reinforcements arrived just as his legs finally gave out. Dorn's voice was the last thing he heard before darkness took him. "Hold the line, protect the human." When woke hours later, the toxin finally purged from her system, she found Danny lying on a bed beside her. His body was covered in wounds. Doctors worked over him with strange instruments, but his hand was still reaching toward her, as if even unconscious he had been trying to protect her. She took his hand in hers and held it gently. "You impossible creature," she whispered. "You wonderful, impossible creature." And for the first time in 300 years, the supreme monarch of the collective wept. Danny woke slowly, rising through layers of darkness like a swimmer reaching for the surface. His body ached in places he did not know could ache. Every breath felt like a small victory. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was soft blue, gently glowing. He was in a medical chamber, surrounded by machines that hummed with quiet purpose. The air smelled clean and strange, like flowers that did not exist on Earth. Sat beside his bed. She looked tired in a way he had never seen before. Her perfect composure was cracked, showing something vulnerable underneath. "You're awake," she said softly. "How long?" 5 days. The doctors said any other human would have died from your wounds. They do not understand how you survived. Danny tried to smile. It hurt. "I'm stubborn." "Yes, you are." She reached out and touched his face gently. Her fingers were cool against his skin. "The Crimson Veil has been destroyed. Dorn led the hunt himself. Every conspirator has been captured or killed. The threat is ended." "Good." "Danny," her voice trembled slightly, which shocked him. He had never heard her voice shake before. "You carried me through a battlefield. You held a door against dozens of enemies. You nearly died protecting me." "That was the job." "No," she shook her head. "The treaty required a marriage, not a sacrifice. You owed me nothing. You could have run, you could have hidden. Any reasonable person would have, but you stayed." Danny was quiet for a moment. "I stayed because I wanted to." "Why?" He looked at her, this ancient being who ruled galaxies, this empress who had never known true partnership, this lonely queen who had reached across the stars hopping to understand a strange new species. Because somewhere along the way, he said, this stopped being about the treaty. This started being about you. Stared at him. For a long moment she did not speak. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. A gesture he had learned was the expression of deepest trust. I have ruled for 300 years, she whispered. I have commanded armies and shaped the fates of billions, but I have never had someone who would stay simply because they wanted to. Well, Danny said, now you do. The weeks that followed were strange and wonderful. Danny recovered slowly, his human body healing in ways that fascinated the doctors. Visited him every day, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to sit in comfortable silence. When he was strong enough to walk, she took him to places in the palace that no outsider had ever seen. Ancient chambers where the first emperors had made their decisions. Gardens that contained flowers from 100 different worlds. A room at the very top of the palace where you could see the curve of the planet below. This is where I come when the weight becomes too heavy, she admitted. I have never shown it to anyone. Why show me? She turned to face him. Because I do not wish to carry the weight alone anymore. A formal ceremony was announced. Not the political marriage they had rushed through before, but a true bonding ceremony, the kind reserved for who chose each other out of love. The news spread across 300 star systems. The Empress was marrying the human again, and this time it was real. Dorn stood as Danny's ceremonial guardian, a role of great honor among the. When other nobles questioned why, the old warrior simply said, because he fights like a dying star and loves like a living one. Earth sent a delegation led by Ambassador Mitchell. She watched the preparations with amazement. We hoped the marriage would bring peace, she told Danny privately. We never imagined it would bring this. Neither did I. Are you happy, Danny? He thought about the question. He thought about his empty apartment back on Earth, his lonely cargo runs, the years of quiet desperation that had followed the war. Then he thought about Smile, her voice, the way she looked at him like he was the most interesting thing in all the galaxy. Yes, he said, I think I am. The ceremony took place at sunset, when the violet sky of Ara Prime turned to deep gold. The grand hall was filled with nobles from every corner of the empire. Humans watched through broadcast screens across Earth and the colonies. For one moment, two species stood together. Wore a gown of white crystal that seemed to hold starlight within its threads. Danny wore a simple dark suit, the same kind a man might wear to a wedding back home. He had refused anything fancier. I am what I am, he had told the confused tailors. She is marrying me, not a costume. They stood before each other in the center of the hall. Spoke first, reciting ancient vows in her own language. Then she repeated them in English so that Danny's people could understand. I bind myself to you not by duty but by choice. I stand with you not by command but by desire. Whatever comes, we face it together. This is my word, eternal and unbroken. Danny had thought long about what to say. He had rejected the formal speeches the diplomats had written for him. In the end, he spoke simply from his heart. Where I come from, we don't live very long. We don't rule empires or travel between stars. We're just people trying to get through each day, but we know something important. We know that love is rare, and when you find it, you hold on with everything you have. He took her hands in his. I didn't come here looking for love. I came here because someone had to, but I found you and you changed everything. So here's my promise. I will stand beside you. I will protect you. I will make you laugh when the weight gets too heavy. And I will stay, not because of any treaty, but because there's nowhere else I'd rather be. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. Around the hall, Noble watched in stunned silence. Humans had never spoken to them like this, with such simple honesty, such unguarded feeling. Dorn wiped his eyes with one of his forearms and pretended it was nothing. On Earth, Ambassador Mitchell watched the broadcast and smiled. This was better than peace. This was proof that the universe was bigger than old fears and ancient hatreds. Danny turned to face the watching galaxy together. He was just a cargo hauler from Earth. She was the most powerful being in 300 star systems. But in that moment, they were simply two people who had found each other against all odds. The crowd began to cheer. It started slowly, then grew until the grand hall shook with the sound, and human voices mixed together in celebration of something new. Danny looked at his wife, his empress, his partner. "What happens now?" he asked. Smiled, wide and true, and completely without the careful control she usually wore. "Now," she said, "we find out together." And hand in hand, they walked into whatever came next.